Susie and Luke were heartbroken after losing their son. They visited his grave every day. One day, they noticed that someone was leaving a fresh rose on his grave before they arrived. This made them curious about who was doing it. Wanting to find out, Luke decided to set up a camera. What he found shocked them. As they looked at the footage, they felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. They realized they were about to see something surprising. Overwhelmed with emotions, they decided to wait until the next day to watch the video, needing time to calm down before making a big decision. Luke and Susie anxiously watched as the screen flickered, and a pop-up appeared, with anticipation building up. All they needed to do was press play to uncover the mystery of who had been leaving those red roses on their son's grave. Who was behind this heartfelt gesture, and would Luke and Susie decide to confront the person responsible? Susie and Luke had never fully moved on from the pain of losing their son, Zachary, who was only 18 years old when he tragically lost his life in a car accident, leaving his parents devastated. Since that tragedy, it had been challenging for the couple to navigate life as just the two of them. As parents, they never anticipated the heartbreaking reality of outliving their own child. After their son's untimely passing, they found themselves with very little money. Every penny they had saved was spent on his funeral arrangements. However, they never complained about their situation. They believed that their son deserved a peaceful final resting place and made a promise to continue looking after him, even in his absence. Little did they know the profound impact that Zachary's death would have on their lives. They visited his grave every day, bringing flowers and mementos to remember him by. This became a routine for them and a way of keeping him close. It was just the two of them, and they cherished that one-on-one time, telling their son what had happened that day. But one day, they noticed something strange. It was a Monday, and Susie and Luke were on their way to the cemetery. As they approached their son's grave, they noticed something lying on top of it. "This wasn't here yesterday," Susie said, and Luke agreed. Why would anyone put something on someone else's headstone? Susie and Luke were baffled. A single red rose was lying on the headstone, and they had no idea who had put it there. They looked around, but no one was in sight. They examined the graves surrounding their son's grave to see if any others had red roses, but Zachary was the only one. Strange, they thought. At first, they brushed it off as a random act of kindness by a stranger, but every time the rose wilted, a new fresh one appeared. They became increasingly curious about who would put these roses on Zachary's grave. But there was no way of finding out who was doing this, or so they thought. This went on for a few months, and they learned to appreciate the roses, but they were still keen on solving the mystery. But how? Then one day, Luke came home with an idea. What if we hang cameras on the premises pointed at Zachary's grave? He asked his wife. But Susie wasn't impressed. "I'm sure that's against the privacy policy, Luke," she responded. However, Luke didn't give up that easily. He was determined to find out who kept putting these roses on his son's grave. So one night, he bought a new security camera and drove to the cemetery without telling his wife. It was pitch black outside, and the only light he had was from his tiny pocket flashlight. He searched for the best hiding spot for the camera and checked to see if it had a clear shot of his son's grave, and it did. So he installed the camera and looked at it proudly. All he had to do now was wait. He went home and crawled into bed next to Susie, who pretended to be asleep. She knew what her husband had done that night, but she didn't stop him either. Deep down, she was just as curious as he was to find out who this person was. But she wouldn't confess that to her husband. They continued to visit Zachary's grave every day for the next 2 weeks. Luke kept acting suspiciously around the grave, sneakily looking at the camera. Susie noticed, of course, but didn't say a word to Luke about it. She kind of liked having her own secret. But then one day, Luke messed up. On a Tuesday morning, Luke and Susie got ready to head to the cemetery when they received a call. It was the cemetery's supervisor. Someone had complained about the camera, and the supervisor had to confiscate it. She noticed that the footage was focused on Zachary's grave, so she made the connection to Luke and Susie. Filming without everyone's consent was indeed against the cemetery's privacy policy, so she had to hand in the camera to the police. However, because she knew Luke and Susie personally, she made an exception. She kept a copy of the footage especially for them, but she didn't tell them what she had seen in the footage. She informed Susie and Luke that they could collect the footage at the end of the day. Susie and Luke were eager to discover the identity of their son's mystery rose giver. They spent the day trying to distract themselves before heading to the cemetery. When they arrived, the cemetery supervisor was waiting at Zachary's grave with a USB stick. She handed it to them, saying, "I thought you had to see this," leaving them puzzled. Once home, they hesitated to watch the footage, wondering what it might reveal about their son. They decided to wait until morning. The next day, as they ate breakfast, Luke expressed his uncertainty about the USB stick. Finally, he declared he needed to know the truth, and Susie agreed to watch it together. After setting up the laptop, they exchanged a determined look. Luke held the USB stick and inserted it into the laptop, feeling nervous as the screen flickered. They were about to uncover the mystery behind the roses, unaware of the shocking revelation that awaited them. Slowly, he moved his computer mouse over to the play button and made sure that Susie was ready for whatever they were about to see. The video started playing. When the footage rolled, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. They could see that the camera had a clear view of the grave, but no one was in sight. After watching for over 5 minutes, Susie and Luke wondered if they had made a mistake, but then they spotted something moving on the edge of the frame. There was a person wearing all black approaching their son's grave. They couldn't tell any details about who it might be. The only detail that stood out was the single red rose the visitor was carrying. They placed it upon the grave but didn't clearly show their face. Who was it? Susie and Luke replayed the scene over and over to see if there were any hints hidden in the footage. Susie swore that it was a woman, but the person was wearing enormous sunglasses that made it impossible to see the outline of their face. Yet there was something so familiar about the visitor. At last, they realized why it seemed like they recognized the woman. It was because they actually knew her quite well. Susie questioned how it was possible for her to be there, but neither of them had any ideas. They knew that they needed to find out what she was doing at the cemetery. It had been over 10 years since they'd last seen the woman. Susie and Luke kept watching the video, and Susie realized she needed answers from the mysterious woman visiting their son Zachary's grave. With no way to contact her after so many years, they decided to go to the cemetery and wait for her. The next morning, they arrived early, unsure if the woman had a regular schedule. When they got there, the supervisor was already at Zachary's grave, curious about what they had discovered. Susie and Luke asked her about the woman, but she only knew that she visited regularly. When Luke revealed they knew who the woman was and wanted to talk to her, the supervisor realized the situation was more complicated than she thought. Instead of leaving, she hid behind a tree to watch. Soon, a familiar car pulled in, and the supervisor was excited to see the woman step out, carrying a single red rose. As she approached the grave, she glanced up and froze for a moment. The three of them stood silently and stared at each other. None of them moved or spoke. The supervisor wasn't sure what was about to happen next. Would they fight, argue, or scream? She started to wonder if they might even be a danger to each other. Finally, Susie took a step forward. The supervisor was surprised to see that she was smiling and even seemed to be crying from happiness. She called out to the woman by name, addressing her as Eden. The supervisor couldn't stop watching to see how Luke and the woman would react. Luke stepped forward as well and held out his arms to the woman named Eden. She didn't move immediately, almost as if she were thinking about what she wanted to do next. But when she decided, she approached Luke and returned the hug. Suddenly, it was like all the tension had vanished. The supervisor felt guilty for spying on such a heartfelt moment, so she moved away from the tree and went to talk to the trio. They were all crying happily and embracing each other. It wasn't what the supervisor had expected to happen, but it was clear that she was missing some key details. The supervisor couldn't help herself from talking to them to hear the truth about the mysterious visitor to Zachary's grave. Susie and Luke were a little confused about why the supervisor was still there and why she cared enough to keep tabs on what their family was doing. They found her next question even more unusual. The supervisor asked who Eden was to them and why there had been a need for such secrecy. Susie and Luke thought it was a bit rude of her to ask, but Eden didn't seem to mind. After all, the supervisor had gotten used to seeing Eden around. The revelation was shocking. Eden was Susie and Luke's daughter. The supervisor had thought she was just an old friend or someone unrelated. Confused, she learned that Eden had run away as a teenager and had been visiting Zachary's grave alone, unsure if her parents would want to see her again. Now reunited, Eden confessed that she missed them and wanted to support them after Zachary's death. Although they didn't recognize her at the funeral, Luke and Susie were overjoyed to have Eden back in their lives. They promised to stay close and honor Zachary's memory together. What do you think of this story? Let us know in the comment section. I hope you liked this video. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.